everyone. Good morning. Great to see you here. Let's have a quick show of hands. Who's new today? How many folks? This whole left side? Great. Well, welcome to our second day of the Climate Beacon Conference. I'm delighted to be here. For those of you that weren't able to be here yesterday, this is the first signature event brought to you by the Climate Beacon Project, which is our big conference. And what we hope is that we will have many, many years of bringing you the best innovations, smartest ideas, really focusing in on the good collaborations that are happening across the Commonwealth. As you know, we are really focused on harnessing the best solutions. We can focus on what's not working. We're going to talk about what is working. We're going to highlight those really great can-doers so that we leave here with a sense of inspiration and understanding of what can we do next, and more importantly, us focused on getting to the goal of reducing emissions and doing it in a way that's equitable. So our name, Climate Beacon, it's a nod to our goals. When we talk about a beacon, we're talking about shining a light and highlighting those best innovations, great collaborations, and super smart people. We believe in the power of having really good policy that sets a signal to the market, that helps us understand what is our direction. We believe in the power of collaboration, and I think those that were here yesterday evening, that no one can do this by themselves. No one sector, no one political party. We really need all hands on deck. And then we also believe that if we focus on the big picture, what are we trying to get to? And how do we get there? That we can do it in a way that is both equitable and really improves people's quality of lives. So that's what we're trying to do at the Climate Beacon. Yesterday, we had the distinct pleasure of hearing from Senator Ed Markey, who is a clean energy expert and a leader and a pioneer in climate change. He talked about what the nation is doing. He highlighted all the great money that's come to the Commonwealth. And now I want to know, how do we get some of that, and where is it, and how do we find it so we can leverage it in all the right places? And we heard from Governor Deval Patrick and MIT President Raphael Reif, who talked about the importance of universities using good data, of taking risks, and not being afraid to fail, because in our failure is when we're going to have lots of successes and really figure out the path forward. So today, we're going to hear from, I was super excited yesterday. We had great panels on siting and permitting. What does that look like? How do we accelerate progress? We had a fabulous panel led by BECMA and others, and Bob Chen at UMass on the future of workforce. We know that there are about 200,000 jobs that we need to fill in the Commonwealth right now. How do we fill it? And then there are tens of thousands of jobs in the clean tech sector. So making sure that we are matching our jobs and the needs of the future to the future workforce. Really, really good conversations. Yesterday was fabulous. Today's even better. Today we're going to have like an amazing, amazing discussion. We are going to be talking and hearing from voices across the field. You're going to hear from nonprofit groups, community leaders, members, folks focused in architecture, built environment. We're going to focus on how are we making our communities and our people more resilient. So if yesterday was around reducing emissions, today is really focused on how are we making sure that as the climate is changing, that we are reducing emissions, and we're doing it in a way that improves quality of life, makes better neighborhoods, and helps people adapt to a climate that we already know is changing. So this morning, you're going to hear from panelists about how Massachusetts can lead the way to climate action, with remarks from Boston Mayor, my mayor, Michelle Wu, EE Secretary Rebecca Tepper, First Light Power's Alicia Barton, CBT Architecture Devanshi Purhoit, and BECMA, Black Economic Council of Massachusetts, Nicole Obi. And that's a panel that's going to be moderated by longtime WCVB political reporter Janet Wu. In a bit, there'll be a main stage panel discussion, how building more resilient communities, followed by solution sessions on mobility. So we're going to focus on how we're moving people around and what does it look like to have a resilient mobility system. We're going to focus on the built environment. How are we building our communities, and how do we make sure in the process of that we're baking in resilience? We are going to highlight open spaces, How do we use our open spaces so that they both hubs of resilience, they can absorb water and people can use them and have fun? And then how are we thinking about public health? As our climate is changing, we're having bigger health impacts, asthma, more allergies. I don't know about you, but my allergies have been going crazy, right? And so we're going to have experts from our public health community talk to us about what they're doing to address resilience. And then our final Harborside chat this evening will feature former EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy, another visionary, another local who is also a visionary in climate at the national and local level. And we will hear from New England Aquarium CEO Vicki Spruill. Sound like a good agenda? Yeah, really great, really great. So I'm proud that I have the opportunity to welcome a visionary climate leader and my mayor, Boston Mayor Michelle Wu, to the stage. Mayor Wu, she's a daughter of immigrants, a public schools mom, and the first person of color to be elected mayor of Boston. She is the country's Green New Deal mayor. In her first term, she's putting in place a climate agenda that addresses our biggest global challenge with solutions rooted in justice and quality of life for Bostonians. In her personal life, she exemplifies the kind of mayor all cities should have. And when she speaks not only in her role as mayor, but from lived experience. 5 years ago, I think it might have been more like 7, I attended a Bar Foundation trip to Amsterdam with Mayor Wu and other global leaders to hear about energy and transit solutions. Her exuberance and openness to learning from others and digging deep on solutions, it was inspiring. She asked super thoughtful questions on bikes. She got super excited about the bus network and the transportation system and how moving people around, and you could see her envisioning in real time how Boston could do that. She's lived these values long before her time in the mayor's office, beginning with her time as a Boston City Council, working on resilience across the most vulnerable neighborhoods. I remember when I ride the Orange Line all the time, and when she was a city council, the thing I remember, she used to take the train with her little boy who loved trains. And there he was on the train, super excited to be there on his way to City Hall. And so you have a mayor who, is a transit rider. This is her lived experience. She is part of this city. She belongs to us, and we're delighted to have her here. Today, she's focused on moving Boston forward to hit ambitious climate goals. She's investing $20 million in decarbonizing our buildings, adding electric school buses to our fleet, which she rode with the superintendent of schools the first couple days. And she's launching the widely recognized Power Corps program, launching residents into green infrastructure and building operations career pathways. So making sure that we are building career pathways. As for what Boston might get right, I asked, what might Boston get right? Like, if we do this climate thing, what does Boston look like and how do we get it right? Her answer was everything. Like, she's the kind of mayor who understands that climate action is connected to every element of life in our city, from transportation and housing to workforce development and trash collection. These are just a few examples of her innovative leadership, putting Boston at the forefront of the climate movement. Please join me in welcoming Mayor Michelle Wu to the stage.
Thank you so much, Mary. Thank you for your leadership, for your many, many ways in which you convene and bring people together to reach our collective full power. And I will say I'm so grateful that you are stepping up in this moment to serve as the Boston rep on the MBTA board as well. Thank you. We're so, so thankful. And good morning to all. It is my deep honor to welcome you to day 2 of Boston's first annual Climate Beacon Conference. I am thrilled that we're at this moment. I remember when Alex first came not too long ago and said he had this idea, he was ready to go, gonna put this together, and we started mapping out what it would look like, the kind of grand vision and ambition for what it would mean, and the fact that this conference would be not just people talking and the same old, but action and organizing and strategizing to then start implementation. And we started backing out the dates, and it felt not only ambitious in its scope, but in its timing. So I am so thankful that Alex and Mary and the entire Climate Beacon team were unwilling to settle for a sort of standard, slow implementation of this conference timeline, have made it so that Boston could get going on this very important convening so that we can get going on all that is going to come out of it. I am here today, as Mary shared, as a mom with the impatience of someone who's raising 2 kids in a very quickly changing and often scary world. I share the dreams of so many who are hoping to pour everything into the next generation and believe that Boston is the place where anything is possible, matched by the very real anxieties of the headlines coming out every single day from all around the world and very close to home about how little time we have left to really ensure that we're passing down the future that our kids deserve. I'm also someone who has seen the power of being able to touch and feel and experience what we can do. I grew up as a kid in climbing every possible tree. If ever I had spare time, my parents would know to just shout outside and I would climb down from wherever I was. Nature was sort of where I found myself. But as I grew older, it didn't seem that climate was an issue that I had any control over. And certainly, as I even started on the city council, it wasn't my first instinct, because it felt at the city level, we are so limited and focused in our scope that how could we possibly address this international global challenge that everyone is facing. And then I went on that Green Ribbon Commission study tour to see cities very similar to Boston in density, in population, in the winding streets, and to be able to experience what is possible, to be able to see it and imagine it and then bring it back has completely changed how I think about our city's impact and potential. And so I'm so grateful to all of you that you're here to help us envision and strategize and make tangible all the ways that we can take action and must do so with urgency. I want to thank my fellow honorary co-chairs. It's an honor for me to be in this role, helping to launch this conference. Thank you, Senator Markey, who I heard brought down the House yesterday, Governor Healy, whose leadership is already making such a big difference, and the incomparable Gina McCarthy, our local treasure. And thank you to the many organizations and leaders from across industries and sectors joining us to bring your collective knowledge and resources here on our most pressing challenge. It has felt for so long like experts and advocates have already been saying this is coming, and we need to take immediate action at scale to stave off the worst of climate change's impacts. And for just as long, it's felt like we haven't quite managed to mobilize what we need to move fast enough, to dream big enough. And instead of leaps and bounds that we've needed, it's been much more tentative, small steps. So I want to thank all of you first for the important conversations yesterday, as I have been told and heard a little bit about the level of commitment to get us where we need to be was really explored from every angle, from large-scale permitting, transmission, and deployment, to the dizzying speed at which we'll need to reduce the number of gas-fueled vehicles on our roads, and the order of magnitude at which we'll need to scale renewables like wind turbines. I also want to echo UMass Boston Chancellor Marcelo Suarez Orozco's comments from yesterday in expressing such gratitude for our young people who see the world through clear eyes and have been the heart and muscle keeping up the drumbeat for accountability and climate action at every level. Today, climate change is no longer the dark clouds hovering and beginning to gather on the horizon. Here in Boston, as a coastal city and a historic city with aging infrastructure, we already feel the raindrops falling, literally. In July and August this year alone, Boston recorded more than 20 inches of rain. For context, that's about half of the usual annual rainfall we get over the entire year, concentrated into just 2 months. At the same time, this past July was the third hottest in Boston's recorded history. We know that these dramatic fluctuations between sweltering hot days and what feel like tropical downpours, the kind of torrential rains that our neighbors in New York experienced last month and in Leominster, this is a direct result of climate change. And while the consequences affect all of us, it is, as always, our most vulnerable and underrepresented communities who are hit first and hardest, deepening the existing inequities by adding weight to the shoulders of those already disproportionately burdened. I know that many of yesterday's conversations also centered these concerns and reinforced the importance of equity as the primary lens through which we must view our climate work. And I'm proud of and inspired by the thoughtfulness, courage, and brilliance of climate leaders we're so blessed to have here in our city and across our Commonwealth. This morning, what I want to make clear is that you all are not here by accident. You're not just folks who are showing up for the next big thing. Just last week, I had the opportunity to join many who had convened at the Tough Tech Summit in Boston to discuss how best to apply emerging technologies to mitigate climate change, from fusion energy to carbon-free building materials. And one of the biggest things that we heard from founders was that while they had the option to build their companies anywhere in the world, they chose Boston. They chose Boston for our unique ecosystem of R&D and the unparalleled talent pipeline potential, for the constellation of academia, industry, and local government, all working in concert to advance climate action in a way that doesn't exist anywhere else on the planet. Between the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act, American Rescue Plan funding, CHIPS and Science Act, and funding opportunities from ARPA-H, congratulations to the entire state and to the region for this achievement, we are already seeing generational investments in climate action at the federal level. And with the creation of Massachusetts Community Climate Bank and recent announcements around long-term biodiversity plans, bans on single-use plastic bottles, we're also seeing such leadership at the state level that can complement these ambitious goals we're setting here in Boston. But I will say I'm a little biased, maybe, but my view is that it's here at the level closest to the people, traveling the streets, swimming in the water, breathing the air, that we have the greatest opportunity to demonstrate just how much we can do together. I tell my staff all the time that I have a hard time talking about climate alone because it does touch absolutely everything. And I think Oliver Sellers Garcia, our Green New Deal director, and other members of our team are here today. So find him afterwards so I don't have to go on my soapbox about everything that we are doing in Boston and how important it is, from retrofitting multifamily housing to our electric school buses and public transit initiatives, workforce development pipelines and Power Core also in the House, waste collection efforts, school lunches and food. There's too much that we have to keep going on. There's no nook or cranny in our city, no aspect of any Residence Day that isn't somehow connected to or rely on our planet being healthy. And because I know there's a panel of amazing women from across the Commonwealth right after this, I'm going to just try to hone in on one single example of how Boston is thinking about the many multifaceted opportunities that this moment presents. Last week, I joined Senator Markey to celebrate $11.4 million that the U.S. Forest Service will give to the city of Boston through a grant that our federal delegation fought for. That money will go toward preserving and expanding our urban tree canopy in a variety of different ways, including just planting more trees and building our workforce, expanding our Power Core program. But it also means getting right down to the street level, funding more green infrastructure with new permeable paving materials as well. It is, in fact, changing how we pave our sidewalks that will allow us to plant more trees along streets and sidewalks without interfering with accessibility in the way that some of our existing tree pits do. This means that Boston will have more beautiful, greener streets with more accessible sidewalks to recapture groundwater, mitigate flooding, and add density to our tree canopy in ways that clean our air and protect our neighborhoods against extreme heat. It's also creating more jobs through our Power Core program, young adults from communities and backgrounds traditionally underrepresented in the green economy, and beautifying our neighborhoods with tree-lined streets that are easy for everyone to move around, encouraging people to get outside and engage with their neighbors and build community. It can feel like a pretty small thing to plant a tree, but this is our most powerful green technology, and it builds up so quickly, not only to ensure that we are reaping all the benefits of climate resiliency, but closing gaps and addressing long-standing inequities. When we involve different departments, different sectors, collaborate across different levels of government, we're finally able to take advantage of all the ways that climate change touches every aspect of our lives, for equity, economic opportunity, social cohesion, and climate justice all at once. And it's scaling up these solutions that is possible as Boston's charge as well. I could go into a whole nother soapbox about the incredible second and third level effects of more reliable, more efficient, more accessible, and free public transit. But Mary will lead on that front. We have so many opportunities to create and prove that climate action can be so much more than just steps we're taking to avoid harm. When our actions are intersectional and collaborative, we pave the way for building a world that's so much better in many ways for all of us. And so I want to once again thank the Climate Beacon team for recognizing the need to convene all of the incredible potential and possibility in our city and across our region here in one place, and for creating a powerful new annual space for climate champions to share insights and experiences and produce the next generation of climate solutions that will scale and apply all around the world. Thank you for your commitment. Thank you for your energy. Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you, Mayor Wu, for sharing how Boston is leading the way. Our mayor's incredible. When she gets funding to plant trees, it's not just a tree. She's funding jobs. She's funding trees that take carbon out of the air. She's funding livable communities that look amazing. She's being mindful of accessibility. This is what you talk about leadership, when you're able to take one initiative and really have it do multiple things. Thank you so much, Mayor. The next panel, I would love to welcome longtime WCVB political reporter Janet Wu to the stage, who will expertly moderate our next panel. This panel is going to focus on how Massachusetts could lead the way to the future as we aim to reach our climate goals, some of the most ambitious in the nation. Our panelists will help us understand what we need to focus on in order to achieve these goals and lead globally. We not just want to focus on Massachusetts, Boston, Massachusetts, we want to be global leaders. Welcome to the stage, Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, Secretary Rebecca Tepper. She'll be joined by First Light Power's Alicia Barton, CBT Devanshi Purhoit, and BECMA, Black Economic Council of Massachusetts, Nicole Obi.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to lead this discussion, but it's really up to the four of you to get everything moving here, and this is what everyone is waiting to hear about. I'm going to sort of set the stage by offering a very broad question that affects not only Massachusetts, but every state, every country that is trying to lead in this movement. It's a broad question, and I'm only looking for simply a one-sentence answer from each of you, because we're going to dive deeper into each of the things that Mayor Wu talked about. Al Gore believes that fossil fuel interests are co-opting what many of you here are trying to do. And Michael Bloomberg believes that big oil and gas have got to be part of the solution. So very briefly, just to get the conversation started, which direction do you guys lean? I'm going to start with you at the very end, Secretary Tepper.
I mean, this has got to be it. Oh, sorry.
First, let me say good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having us, and really excited to be here with this wonderful group of women talking today. And thank you for inviting us all here to a conference that clearly is focusing on positivity and moving forward, and that is what we're trying to do in the Healy Driscoll administration. So we appreciate everybody thinking about real world issues and how we're going to get them done. I would say all of what we're doing here today and what I think this group shows is that this is an effort of all of ours, and everyone has a responsibility to participate in it.
So Michael Bloomberg, Al Gore, where do you lean a little bit?
I don't think I need to lean either way.
Oh, okay. All right. Alicia?
Well, again, good morning, everyone, and it is great to be here with this outstanding group of women to have a great conversation. So I would say, actually, I've probably revised my position on this a little bit and probably was more in the Bloomberg camp originally, and I do think there's a huge role for the financial capital, intellectual capital, the intellectual property that has been developed over decades in the oil and gas sector to be deployed to climate solutions. And I think we can do well by harnessing that. Unfortunately, I do think it has to be like trust but verify. So we've had recently, it's unfortunate to say, but a number of the oil companies that I would have pointed to as being leaders in making sustainable investments and pivoting their business models with the run-up in commodity prices that we've seen globally, they've pulled back, and they're more focused on stock buybacks and dividends than they are in investing in the urgency of the climate crisis. And that's something that I think we have to confront and say that's actually a fact pattern that's playing out. So that's, we have to hold people accountable to meet the rhetoric that they're
You're leaning a little
out.
bit towards Al right now.
I started on one side and sort of been dismayed to see recent activities pushing me in the other direction.
Interesting, very interesting. Devanshi, how about you? Which direction are you leading?
First of all, what a way to start the morning. I'm incredibly proud to be sitting here with all of you. I think I'm going to side with the secretary here, and it's an incredibly complex problem that I don't claim to understand.
It's a tough question. I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, so you're a little bit more like Switzerland.
I just generally think, coming from a design background, that we can't work in silos, right? We have to go across the table and take ideas from wherever they can come from, and just have an open mind and be open to ideas irrespective of the source.
Nicole.
Good morning, everyone. I will just really mirror what I've heard, which is it is complicated. We definitely want to see movement and commitments being made, as well as the follow-through. And what I'm particularly interested in seeing is making sure that we don't implement solutions the same way we have in the past.
So it sounds like you're leaning a little bit towards Alicia, a little bit, but not quite, maybe not quite as far. So let's dive a little deeper into this conversation, talk about Massachusetts in specific. We're talking about Massachusetts leading the country to clean energy with good job growth while building happy communities and without sacrificing goals. That's a tough, goal to meet. Let's start with what we're already doing. Are we leading this battle? And again, focus on good jobs, happy communities without sacrificing goals. Secretary Tepper, I'm going to go to you first for this one, but not every question, but this one for sure.
Fair enough. Yeah, we are really excited about what's going on in Massachusetts. Massachusetts and Boston are leaders in the country, and people are looking to us for their ideas of how to move forward. We have been really excited about sort of 3 areas that we've been focusing on in the last couple of months, and those are equity, resilience, and decarbonization. I don't think anybody would be surprised that those are the top 3 items that we've really been focusing on. With equity, we have the first Undersecretary of Environmental Justice and Equity, and that means that we have also gotten enough money in the budget, money is a big deal, to have environmental justice liaisons in every agency in our secretariat. Yesterday, for the very first time, we had a gathering of intersecretariats on equity and environmental justice. And the point there is to have a group that comes together that makes sure that in all of the decision-making that we're doing, transportation, housing, as we have talked about many times, this issue affects everybody. So the idea is to bring more people to the table and to make sure that we are thinking in our decision-making about who is impacted and who has benefited from our decisions. So really excited about that work. I will just quickly touch on resilience, because we have a big announcement today that we have a new strategy that's called Resilience Mass. And the idea of Resilience Mass is to recognize, as I think we all do after this summer, that climate change is here, that we need to adapt, and we need to make sure that we know what the biggest hazards are and talk about how we're going to address those biggest hazards. So not surprisingly, our biggest hazard is inland flooding. And, excuse me, and so the purpose of the strategy is to take these different challenges and to think about what state government can do to help. And it's a whole of government approach. It was put together because FEMA requires it, but it was put together by a whole group of intersecretariats, and every secretary has obligations under this Resilient Mass strategy. So really excited to move that forward and make sure that we are addressing the hazards, because we had a really difficult summer.
But have most communities gotten this message, and are they moving at the speed that they need to? Who wants to grab that one? Alicia?
Sure. Well, I don't think anybody could not get the message. We're, across the state, as the Secretary just emphasized, we're seeing real-time impacts from climate change, and congratulations on the announcement today. It sounds like, the state is trying to bring real resources to those communities that are on the front lines of a changing climate, and seeing the challenges that presents. Obviously, we have 351 cities and towns. There's not, one answer for whether communities are moving fast enough, but there certainly are a lot of good examples of leadership. Obviously, the amazing Mayor Wu, who just, ran us through what Boston's doing. But we see this also in rural communities all across New England, and including in Massachusetts. So, for example, our company, we partner with municipal electric utilities, so like muni light plants, they're often called, many of whom have set their own voluntary goals to be 100% clean electricity, and who work with our company for us to deliver that clean power to them. So it's both local, reliable, and affordable clean power that they can then turn around and say to their constituents in their community that they are leading the charge and they are trying to make change. So I do think there's examples of that all over the place, but obviously the work's not easy. So there's going to be a little bit of variation in terms of other communities that will struggle with education and resources and access to those types of opportunities.
This next question, I think, is a good one for you, Devanshi. What are the biggest roadblocks when it comes to convincing residents to adjust to these new realities of things that they've got to deal with and they've got to not fight because it might be like right at their front door?
Yeah, I think I'm going to answer it in a slightly different way. I think the communities are very enlightened and they're very educated, and there has been a tremendous amount of planning and visioning that has been happening in the last few years, that the communities have played a very active role in coming up with these design ideas. I think the next step is really figuring out how to implement it, and then funding. And I was really happy to hear Senator Markey talk about the funding that's going to be available in order to implement it. And then the second piece is going to be updating our legislation to be able to build these things. Some of the ideas that we're talking about are not, permittable, or our legislation is not up to speed. So there has been tremendous amount of work happening at the state level to update our legislation and regulations to be able to implement some of these ideas and then really get on the ground and get the ball rolling.
So do you get the sense that more of the resistance is coming from people living in the communities, or is it the State House legislators not moving fast enough?
I wouldn't say there is resistance in the communities. It's more on the end of trying to create some sort of a balance between climate priorities and equity conversations and talking about environmental justice issues. So if you're really struggling at a survival level, you probably don't have the bandwidth to think about, 2070 when you're struggling today. So it's sort of creating sort of balancing act between affordable housing, for example, but then how can that affordable housing be also contributing to climate challenges?
And I'll add that our focus at BECMA is around environmental as well as economic justice around this space. And so for our communities, we feel that there are a lot of resources that are available today from state, federal levels. What's important is that we connect the dots, and I'll give you an example. In Massachusetts, the unemployment rate is pretty low, relatively speaking, to where it was during COVID. But for Black and Brown residents of Massachusetts, it's at 11%. I think the average is around 2.5% for white folks. So when we're looking for tens of thousands of people to be part of the workforce and part of this community around building our meeting our climate goals, we really have to do more to understand how do we bring equity and solutions to activate our Black and Latino workforce. And also procurement is another place where we're way off. When you think about the skills that are needed to deliver the solutions, when we from a public and private perspective, are still spending with our Black and Brown entrepreneurs at 1%. There's just a lot of runway to go to make sure that we're being inclusive and really activating all of our assets in Massachusetts. So I think that's important, is making those connections between the resources and the communities that want to get involved.
That was actually my next question, and I think more specifically, I think a lot of us really want to know is, we are now at sort of the ground level still of these plans, the money coming in. Are we weaving the diversity factor into these plans now, and are we doing it sufficiently? Or do you think we need to be more aware of it than what we've been doing so far?
I think that we have a lot of work to be done. I think that there's an awareness that it needs to be done, but how we're going to do it, whose voice and has a seat at the table still needs to be determined. We just can't do innovation the same way that we have in the past. We can't, I should say, we can't just implement our solutions the way that we have in the past. And I'll give you a good example. In Massachusetts, the majority of Black-owned businesses are very small. They're sole proprietors, or they have less than 4 employees. That's at a rate about 60%. The work that we need to do is measured in billions, and we can't chunk the work that small. So how do we incorporate these businesses, these workers, into a huge problem, a huge set of challenges when they're so small? So that's where I'm saying we need more innovation, because we can't leave 60% of our businesses on the sideline. We're not going to get there from here anytime soon if we don't think about solutions around that. And so that's a big part of the work that we do.
Yeah, and I would just add that I think this is a role that the state can have a very positive role in. I think we are very focused on the workforce issue, and particularly on making sure that we fill the 38,000 new clean energy jobs that we're going to need before 2030. And one way that we're doing that is promoting new entrepreneurs and women and people of color into this industry. We just recently issued an $18 million grant that is specifically dedicated to that workforce. But we need to bring in people all over the energy spectrum, including, when I talk to kids, I always say the heroes of the energy transition are going to be the electricians. So we need to be talking to our kids about the exciting opportunities. They all want to be involved in this challenge, and it's a huge crisis for them, and they look around and they say, well, what can I do? Well, what you can do is you can be a part of the clean energy transition by working in it. And there are lots of jobs, and I think it behooves all of us to be real advocates for getting people interested in this kind of work.
Yeah, and maybe to round out the perspective and, different from the awesome state leadership that Massachusetts is showing on workforce training, to add, kind of the business sector perspective as a company that's operating and developing new clean energy projects in many places, including here in Massachusetts and New England. It is a challenge, right? And so I think it's also easy for businesses to say, oh, that's great, Rebecca's got it. She's going to put out a grant. They're going to find all the people, and then they'll all show up. But I think we do have to actually challenge ourselves as business leaders, as companies working in the sector to find those partnerships, to come up with creative solutions, and it's not always easy. Just one quick example of something I'm proud of that our company worked on, which relates to repowering a fossil fuel peaking power plant located in Connecticut, not Massachusetts, but we have decided to retire that facility and repower it as a battery peaking facility. It's relatively small. It's 17 megawatts, which is small for people that don't speak megawatts, and yet it's located in an environmental justice community. So I challenged our team to say, how do we make this project a win for the community? It's not a big enough project. It's not like an offshore wind project where you're going to have lots and lots of jobs associated with that one project, but we did partner with a local organization called Operation Fuel that provides heating assistance to low-income residents in that area, and provided them with a workforce training grant to be able to train additional people to help provide fuel assistance, and this was last year heading into a winter of high energy bills. And so that was not something that was necessarily mandated by the government or part of a program that was required, but one where businesses can get creative to find those solutions and make these projects a win, and we should be holding developers accountable to try and find those opportunities.
I love examples, but before we dive into the next question, a little bit of business here. You may see a QR code at different places. I think they're going to put it up on the screen up there. Where is it? It's over there? Right behind me? Okay. So I have a ton of questions, as I usually do, but I know that those of you in the audience know a lot more about this subject than I do. So please download that QR code and send your questions that you would like asked, because we're going to try to limit this conversation to about a half an hour, and I'd love to get some of your questions and get a chance to throw a couple of these at the panel as well. So keep in mind what I'm missing by asking these questions and what you need to know. Next question. Let's talk a little bit about hydroelectric and wind power to Massachusetts. It's brought a bevy of political challenges. As we move forward, how do you meet these political battles to make all of this modern-day technology a reality in cities and towns? Do you want to start with that?
Don't.
Okay.
I would love to talk about.
Okay, all right.
I can talk about offshore wind all day long.
Okay. Well, please don't do that.
Yes,
but
I will not.
Get the conversation going.
I promise. I am really excited about our offshore wind industry off the coast of Massachusetts. And right now, as we speak, we have our first facility being built that will be providing power to Massachusetts this year. So it's a huge achievement. It's the first one in the country. We should all be very proud of the fact that we're the leaders on offshore wind. Don't get me wrong, there have been problems with that industry recently, right? As have many industries, inflation, COVID, supply chain, all issues that we have to address. But we can't lose sight of the fact that that is a huge opportunity for workforce and for economic development and for cheap energy. So we've got to keep our eye on the ball, and we have a RFP out right now for 3,600 megawatts. And I think one way that we can address sort of the tension that has been happening around some of these issues is by working with our sister states. And I think it's unprecedented, the cooperation right now that we have between the New England states and New York and New Jersey. We're all working together. Just a couple weeks ago, we entered into an MOU that talks about how we're going to do procurements and how I'm sorry, an agreement with Connecticut and Rhode Island that allows developers to bid their projects into all 3 states. So instead of competing and fighting for every last dollar, we're going to say, developers, here's a big piece of the big pie. You can invest in all 3 states, and I think it's going to be a real benefit to have this kind of cooperation, both for the developers and for people's pocketbooks.
So do you think moving forward it's going to be a less of a political challenge as we try to build these wind farms, as we try to bring hydroelectricity into Massachusetts?
Well, there is no doubt that one of our biggest challenges is siting and permitting.
Right.
And continues to be. And we recently started a siting and permitting council to address these hard questions. I mean, there's a lot of hard questions about land use and where things are going to go. There's going to be a lot of infrastructure that we need to build if we're going to meet our clean energy and climate goals. The question is, how do people do their share? And how are we going to deal with, well, I know we need clean energy, but not here. And this is an opportunity for us to walk the walk that we're all talking about with respect to equity and really think about how communities can be involved in this decision making.
Nicole, you wanted to weigh in?
Well, I didn't want to speak about it politically, but economically, I do think it's important that these developments, these offshore wind developments in particular, really are not only making the commitment to be inclusive, but that they're also being required to be transparent and held accountable to the commitments that are being made to the communities as they win these bids. One of the things that we continually hear from the community is that whether it's these types of development, real estate developments, that commitments get made, but the follow-through isn't necessarily there. These are huge developments that take years and years to happen, and if we wait till the end to say, oops, we missed the number, we can't afford for that to continue to happen, especially as we roll forward with offshore wind. So from an economic perspective, I'd like to see more transparency and accountability as we roll out these new developments, for sure.
Alicia?
Yeah, well, picking up on Rebecca's enthusiasm for offshore wind, and maybe to answer part of that question from only my own perspective, I don't know that it gets easier politically. I think it is going to be a challenge. In the context of preparing for this panel, though, I was thinking about, Massachusetts leadership. That's kind of the topic that we were going to talk about. And, it's one thing to set big goals, and it's another thing to follow through on. And I do think, we are showing some leadership in that regard. The Vineyard Wind project that the Secretary mentioned is under construction. Some of us remember that this has been a long time coming. Over a decade ago, I was at the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, and we, under Governor Patrick's leadership at the time, green-lighted investment in a port facility in New Bedford, Massachusetts to launch the offshore wind industry. It was planned for Cape Wind at the time. Cape Wind failed, and there were a lot of questions being asked. It was not an easy political moment about why had we invested state funds in an industry like offshore wind that, was looking like maybe not a good bet at the time. And now, as you fast forward a decade, through many twists and turns, that project is being built. The Marine Commerce Terminal is being utilized and, in fact, is oversubscribed. So the state and developers are looking to build additional infrastructure. And so, we do have tough political conversations ahead, but hopefully we can remember that there have been tough political conversations in the past, and following through, keeping our eyes on the horizon towards our, 2030 and 2050 goals, which are incredibly important to hit, is part of the leadership that Massachusetts can show, and not just ourselves, but, other states that are looking to build out offshore wind as well.
And I would just add that I think money helps the political conversation a little bit. There is a significant amount of money available from the federal government for these projects and for others. We recently submitted an application for $250 million for a transmission project that will service the offshore wind industry. And so when you have an opportunity like that, that is going to require significant benefits for the communities around this transmission, but also going to require economic development requirements as well. So I think the addition of some of this federal funding will really help. And I would add that one of the Healy Driscoll administration's priorities is that when we're applying for these grants, it is a Team Massachusetts approach. So we just applied maybe today, tomorrow, for a very large grant for another $250 million grant for Solar for All. And how we did that was we brought people together prior to filing the application and heard and listened about what people wanted from this program if we got this money. And then we built the application based from the bottom up so that when we get this grant, hopefully get the grant, we'll all be ready to go and we'll all be bought in and everybody will have been included in the decision making.
I don't think anybody here doubts that money is key to making all of this work, but I know from my own personal experience, another key element is calling your state reps, calling your city councilors, calling your selectmen, and weighing in, because the more they hear from people about what you are willing to do, what you're willing to accept, the more likely they'll be bold enough to make the changes that need to be made, I think, at the ground level. Let's move on to health ramifications. Do people in Massachusetts think fully, truly understand the health ramifications if we don't move aggressively? One obvious example is what the mayor talked about was the increase in health issues due to climate change. I know I've been coughing and sneezing a little bit. I don't have anything contagious. It's my allergies. You know, I'm allergic to a lot of chemicals that are in our society. It's not even what's growing outside. And I'm sure it has affected many of you here. So then you also have more mosquitoes, more insects during the warm weather. Is there, what can we do to deal with this, you know, right now, actively, so that, you know, things could be different for our children? Who wants to take that one? Devanshi?
Please go ahead.
Recently, Senator Markey had a great event here in Boston at the Franklin Field Housing Complex around installing innovative climate solutions to public housing. And I love the thoughtfulness around starting that work here in Massachusetts in that environment. And so we'd love to just see that we continue to make a commitment to bringing these great solutions to the communities that need them the most, that are least able to afford to take on these works on their own. And so I'd love to just continue to see that happen so that we can address asthma and heat-related and some of the other issues that really are prevalent in disadvantaged and communities across the Commonwealth.
Right, that's a neighborhood where the asthma rates are significantly higher than anywhere else. Devanshi?
Yeah. I'm going to sort of take a line from Mayor Wu's speech and talk about July being the rainiest month since 1955.
Those numbers startled me when I heard that.
And I've read this Nat Geo article which says that by 2070, Boston is going to be more like southwestern Kentucky. So which means that it's not just going to be hotter and wetter, but it's also going to completely change its climatic zone. It's not going to be our New England weather. We may or may not have fall as we, have experienced it. So we're going to have to, as human beings, we're going to have to learn to be and learn and adapt to be in a completely different ecosystem. But when we talk about just human survivability, we're going to have to adapt. Obviously, our built environment is going to have to adapt to, that kind of climate in the future. But us as just human beings are also going to have to adapt to live in a different climate. Maybe the way that we dress would change. The way that we keep our thermostat in the summers will have to change. We may, could we live with 2 degrees warmer in our offices? Yes, maybe. Maybe not wear a blazer every day. But also, we are sitting at the aquarium, and they're deeply committed to protecting the blue planet and ocean conservation and advocacy around it. all our ecosystem and all our biodiversity is going to change. We may not have the same plant species that were historically native to Boston and Massachusetts. So how do we even adapt to that? We also need to think beyond just human beings and their survivability and survival of the ecosystem in itself.
And I would just add that that's exactly what this Resilient Mass plan is trying to get at. And I wanted to get back on one thing that we talked about, which was communities, because communities are on the ground floor of all of this, and they are, I mean, I didn't spend, I don't think a week this summer where I wasn't at some point at a town or a city that was being impacted by climate change. Flooding in western Massachusetts, Leominster lost their dam, lots of erosion happening out on the coast. So one of the things that, one of my very favorite programs that I like to talk about, because I think it directs this, goes directly to this issue, is our municipal vulnerability preparedness grants. Because 99% of the communities have participated in this, and what it allows is money for a town to look at its own vulnerabilities, how it's going to change over time with climate change, and then they present actual real projects that they want to do. Things like cooling centers, I think, are going to be particularly important in communities, and then they get a grant for the action. This year, we're adding a third element to it, which we're calling MVP 2.0, which, don't love the name, but what that has to do with is, okay, now you have the community who is thinking about all of this, and you have the town manager, and you have the mayor who's thinking about it. Well, who else is in the room when you're having those conversations? So 2.0 is about working with the broader neighborhoods, training people to work in their neighborhoods, to bring more people in the conversation about what does resiliency look like in a community as they move forward, and what can they do, what ownership can we have over addressing this problem together.
Just trying to get a timeline of where we are. I can't end this conversation, obviously, because I've got a list of questions here from the audience as well, without talking about transportation. Transportation is already a big problem in Massachusetts. How do we prepare for major floods, bigger winter storms, and hurricanes? Are most cities and towns prepared for this now, knowing that obviously nothing is going to major change within the next 2 or 3 years, but the problems are getting worse each year? Who wants to deal with that?
I'll just start by saying that absolutely transportation is a huge issue, as well as housing. So if we want to activate that workforce that we talked about earlier, then we either have to help them to have a place that they can live and they can afford, or we have to get them able to move about so that they can get to work, to get to schools, and to get home. And so it's all interconnected. It's certainly not a siloed issue.
Do you think we're ready for bigger floods and getting people moving from point A to point B?
I mean, I think you raise a really important point about transportation and housing being together.
Right.
It is a top priority of the Healy Driscoll administration to address housing. And you can see the many programs that we have thought about there. But at the same time, we're thinking about how does that impact where people are living and whether they're living near transportation. Because if you're living near public transportation, that makes it easier for you to get to work, that makes it easier to build housing. So we're looking at trying to have win-wins on that, and there's no doubt that we need work on the T.
So
I want to add one thing. I don't own a car. I don't drive. 10 years of living in Boston, have not driven. But I think the water transportation is such an untapped potential and amazing opportunity that we can really capitalize on as a region. I'm proud to say I live on the harbor. I live in East Boston and work in Charlestown, and I'm extremely hopeful that in the next 10, 15, 20 years, we'll have an amazing water transportation system that would help alleviate a lot of pressures on the
we certainly have the water.
Yeah.
We certainly have the water.
And we can have electrified ferries, too,
yes,
which I'm really excited about. Yeah.
To sort of add what Mary Roberts and Michelle Wu talked about earlier, they were talking about their trip to Scandinavia. I was just there a few weeks ago, and I was amazed at the number of bikes and how the entire city Copenhagen, Stockholm, Oslo, all of them have made way for bikes, public buses. They have priority over drivers. Could you see that in Boston, or is it too late for us to wish for something like that? I know the bike routes have gotten much better since Michelle Wu
That's what I was going to
came
say.
into
I was going to
office.
say, I think, the Wu administration really has dedicated themselves to improving the bike situation in Boston.
But it's nowhere near what they have in Scandinavia.
It
and their
is
weather
not
is no worse than
Copenhagen.
ours. Yeah, exactly.
They say there is no bad weather, there's just bad clothing.
Good line. Okay, so I still have a ton of questions, but we want to go to the questions that you have sent in. From Secretary Tepper, can you, there's one, I think there's one right here. It's from Jack, who's an 8-year-old in attendance. What are 2 important things someone my age, and he's in 3rd grade in Duxbury, can do to be positive and really make a difference?
Wow, Jack. I think that you have a tremendous opportunity, and your generation has a tremendous opportunity to help us build a workforce that is diverse and that can meet our challenges for climate change. So I encourage you and your friends to think about how you want to learn about climate change in school. We now have a innovative pathway specifically for clean energy, where when you get to high school, you can enter this program, and it will help you get a clean energy job when you're done and learn about that.
Give me a list of some clean energy jobs. Electrician, you talked about
Electricians,
earlier. Architects,
plumbers,
obviously.
builders,
Devanshi.
architects, lawyers, offshore wind, everything.
Urban planners, urban planners.
It's all part of this, or the offshore. It's all part of the ecosystem of clean energy.
Great. Second question. Secretary Tepper, can you share more detail about the Resilience Massachusetts? What is the timeline for the impact, and how will success be evaluated?
So we're starting to implement now, right away. We're also looking at particularly about the coast, and we'll have a lot more to say about that, I think, in a couple of weeks, but particularly thinking about how we deal with when we have changes in climate going forward, how do we want to address how people are living on the coast, and how do we want to address how we're going to deal with erosion, et cetera. So all of that is being thought about right now, and I think that we will be able to almost all of the items, the to-dos in the mass resilience strategy do have deadlines on them.
So yesterday, Governor Patrick talked about how we need to increase our tolerance for risk to innovate. How do you manage that fear of failure personally and as organizations?
I'll take that. We're really excited about pushing the envelope when it comes to innovation. And so that's something that we are working with our allies as buyers, as well as with our business communities. So as I said, we have an enormous amount of sole proprietors, very small businesses, and so we're encouraging them to partner to get bigger, faster, so they have a greater breadth of services that they can offer, or greater geographic coverage. So just simple things like that, we feel are innovative. We've been able to use that model to bring Black business owners into the electric vehicle charging space as an example, where for principals, business owners, individually be too small to really serve a need of installing or maintaining electric vehicle charging stations at any scale, but together they are much larger. And so there are opportunities like that to be innovative and supporting entrepreneurs. We just have to think about things differently, but we have to take what we have and go with it. And so that's the work that we do at BECMA.
Great point. Alicia, did you want to weigh in?
Sure. I mean, I love that question, and I'm not surprised that Governor Patrick shared that perspective. He was very good at being a leader who was willing to take risks. And I already shared an example of, building infrastructure that was a little early, but ultimately right on the money and a great investment. And I think one of the things that, for those of us that have been in this business a long time, which I have, building a clean energy future is a very long road. We've had a lot of twists and turns. Where we are now has not come easily, and we have a lot of hard stuff ahead of us. But I do think when I look back at it, actually, some of the quote-unquote failures that we've had are probably the things that have served us well looking ahead. We learn a lot from failure. Again, when Cape Wind failed, we digested that and thought at the time maybe there won't be offshore wind, or maybe there will be, but it has to be different. We have to go about it in a different way. We have to put it in a different location. We have to procure for it differently. And we learned those lessons in a way that has set us up for some future success. And so I just encourage us in terms of trying to embrace that risk tolerance, which we have to do. Climate crisis is an emergency. We are out of time. We have to embrace a little bit of risk, but really, when we have setbacks or headwinds, we digest them and really take what we can to make us stronger going forward.
How is the state tackling both affordable housing and decarbonization at the same time? I know you have probably something to say about that, Secretary, but Devanshi, why don't you get a first crack at that?
I'm going to talk about what we are doing in our work, not from a policy standpoint,
Right.
but I think we always talk about co-benefits. So it's not just even if we talk about housing and decarbonization, but also we just can't tackle decarbonization without tackling resilience, right? All the solutions that we're looking for, they have to have co-benefits. So whatever we are trying to do to solve for affordable housing should also solve for coastal flooding and inland flooding. Open spaces cannot just be for recreational uses. They should be able to absorb coastal flooding. They should be able to alleviate urban heat islands. So all the design solutions that we're looking at have to have multiple benefits and have to address multiple challenges as how we are approaching our work.
Great point. Secretary Tepper, would you like to wrap this question up?
Sure, I'm happy to. That's why we have a green bank, and our green bank is the first bank that is specifically dedicated to housing. And we are committed to making sure that affordable housing, in particular, and public housing are as green as we can make them. We also recently had a $50 million grant specifically for weatherizing and upgrading public and low-income housing, specifically to ensure that they're healthier and that they are clean.
Thank you very much. So I think we're going to try to wrap up this conversation, but I have to address something that must be very obvious to everyone in the room. Anyone have any comment on the fact that everyone on the stage this morning is a woman? Is it a coincidence, or is it a statement on something? Who wants to take this last question? Oh, no one. Go ahead,
I guess
Alicia.
just another example of women climate leaders. I think, obviously we had Mayor Wu here, and Governor Healy is a fantastic example, as well as Lieutenant Governor Driscoll. I mean, there are, it's an amazing time for women climate leaders, and you don't have to look too far for examples, which is fantastic. I don't think that was always the case when I was earlier stage in my career. I know Rebecca feels the same way. So, I think it's, because we're bringing determination, practicality, all the things that, women and mothers often, have to do, and it helps.
Adaptability, change?
I would just throw in that when I used to go to energy conferences earlier in my career, every single time I would go in and I'd look around and I'd count how many women were there. And it would be 1, 2, 3. You go to a conference today, an energy conference today, over 50% women. I mean, there has been a tremendous change in this industry. The one thing I will add, though, is what has not changed enough is our industry is not diverse enough. And that's why we really need to work on this workforce issue.
Great point.
I definitely know that it was not a coincidence. It was very intentional, and a big shout out to Alex and Climate Beacon team for making it happen. But I feel like it's timely and it's appropriate. I know when we were sitting there, we were talking about origins of our name and the cultural backgrounds, and Wu, you mentioned that that's not a conversation you would have an opportunity to have in another setting because you'd probably be the only woman there. So I'm really happy about having this conversation today, and really want to thank Climate Beacon for making it happen.
I think you're absolutely right about that, Devanshi.
And I'll just share that in Massachusetts, we have an abundance of assets, and we just have to be intentional about optimizing this, and this is a great example of us doing that here.
I'd like to believe it's because we're more adaptable to change than perhaps many others. I could be wrong about that, but thank you, Devanshi. Thank you very much all for joining us this morning.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. So great. We know each other. We went to grad school together.
It always takes me longer to leave. No worries. Thank you. That was fantastic. Oh, good. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
What an amazing, amazing panel. What an amazing conversation, and really focused on what does it mean for us to be resilient? How are we making sure that we're baking equity right from the beginning? How do we take advantage of all the assets we have to our disposal? And then I love the question by the 8-year-old, what can he do to have some hope? Where is he? Is he here? And I'm sorry, I can't see a thing. There you are. Thank you for your wonderful question. We have a responsibility to get it right for you, for my daughter, who's a little bit older than you. She's almost 18, but we got to get it right so that when you grow up, you can inherit something that's much better than where we are now. So thanks for your great question. So welcome back. I have the distinct pleasure. Oh, okay. No, we are not welcome back. I'm being told that this is time for a break. So we're going to take a break. It is 10:30. We're going to take a 15-minute break, and we'll see you back here. Have a good one.